Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava, Kamma, and Gimel. Shavua Tov to everyone. This week's learning is sponsored in honor of our dear friend and gifted teacher, Rabbi Yafa Epstein, to pay tribute to the memory of her nephew, Yakir Yamin Hexter Zichrono Lebracha, was killed in Gaza. It was dedicated anonymously by some friends of Yafa. Today's learning is dedicated by the Hadran Zoom family in honor of the birthday of our very own Rabbi Yomi, Becky Goldstein, whose pointed questions keep us on our toes always. Happy birthday to many more years of curiosity, Becky, with lots of love. Okay, we're going to get started right now with going back to the machloket Rava and Abaye. We'll do a quick review of the end of yesterday's stuff. We had a machloket, and soon we're going to bring back the Mishna, our Mishna, as a contradiction or a possible contradiction to Abaye. So we have this issue of eid zomem. If somebody comes in eid zomem, when basically they get, so again, two people come and say, we witnessed this and this happen. And let's just even go background and talk about eidei kasha and eidei azama. So eidei kasha would be two people said, we saw somebody steal something on Sunday in Ranana. And then two witnesses come and say, I'll give you an example of eidei kasha. Well, we were with the thief on Sunday at that time in Jerusalem, and there's no way that that could be the case. So they contradict, or they say, we saw somebody else steal that item, or right, any sort of contradictory testimony, which is directed not at the witnesses, but at who did it. That's called contradictory testimony. We don't know what to do with that. So we basically say, we can't believe either one of you, and we throw them out of court. Today, we're going to end with what does it mean we throw them out of court? Do we turn it into as if they didn't testify? We'll talk about some ramification there. That will be the end of today's stuff. But if it's an eid zomem, which basically means, okay, we'll see this term over and over, imanu ayitem, something we'll get to when we get to makot, and we really talk about eidim zomem. So it's like a page in the middle of Bava Kamma that really belongs there, which is if you have two witnesses that say, we saw someone steal on this and this day, and then two witnesses come and say, hey, we don't know anything about the thief, but we were with you, witnesses, on that day somewhere else entirely, and there's no way you could have seen that. Then we accept their testimony because they're not testifying about two different things. About two of the same things from a different angle. One's testifying about someone, and then the other ones are testifying about the witnesses. So it's not exactly contradictory. Now, in a sense, it is contradictory, and that's exactly the machloket here. So one understanding of, so the question is, once they're considered false witnesses, we can no longer accept their testimony. But from when? Do we cancel out any testimony that happened between the time they testified and were already considered, like Abaye says, a rasha, and therefore we don't accept any future testimony of theirs, or and any past testimony as well? Or do we say, listen, we're only going to cancel out testimonies from this day on, from the day we convicted them? And two understandings of why Rava says that. One is because he says it's a chidush. The fact that we allow this to go ahead, that we allow the second group to be believed over the first, is a bit random. This is what the Torah kind of said. We'll do this, but it's really because the Torah said so, in which case we only have from the moment of it happening, which is the moment they become convicted, because we don't really know which one was lying. It's just the Torah gives us guidelines. Assume this is the one lying if it happens in this way. So that's called the chidush, and then we're only going to go from the moment of the chidush. According to the second understanding of Rava, no, he agrees theoretically with Abaye. These guys were evil from the beginning. We assumed they were the liars. But what? There's a problem, because any testimony they testified in between the time that their first testimony, they were convicted of eidim zomem, to the time they were convicted, which could be half a year, it could be a year, it could be a month, it could be a day, but whatever it is, maybe they testified in all sorts of cases, and now we're going to cause a huge loss to all those people. We feel bad for those people, right? It's going to create a huge mess. So because of that, we're really going to say, let's just push it off and say from the moment they're convicted. So the Gemara now starts with my benayu. What's the difference between them? Das hidu be tre lechad utre lechad. Here's going to be a nafkamina. Okay, whether you say, now we want to know what the difference is between the two explanations of Rava. Let's say we remove the element of chidush. How would that be? So chidush is, we have two and we have two, right? That's the whole thing. And we don't know who to believe. But what if two witnesses came and said about one of the witnesses, we were with you on that day. And two others came and said about the second witness, we were with you on that day. Then you have two against one and two against one. And it's obvious. We're always going to believe 2 against 1. That's no longer a chidush. That's not like, oh, we have 2 and 2. We don't know who to believe. And the Torah says these are your guidelines. That's a guideline that's basically the truth. 2 people are always going to beat out 1 because 1 witness is just not accepted. So that's 1. Or inami de paslinu bagazlanuta. Or what if it wasn't an eid zomem issue? What if they disqualify them by saying, hey, so let's say on Sunday they testify about someone and lied, okay? But we don't know that they lied, really. Then on Wednesday, 2 witnesses come into court and say, hey, you guys testified on Sunday. It actually doesn't matter what day. They could have come the same day. But they said, you guys testified on Sunday that you stole. But I'm sorry, that so-and-so stole or whatever happened. But, last week on Wednesday, we saw you stealing from someone. Now, if you're a thief, you can't testify. We don't accept your testimony because if you steal money from people, then probably you'll take money to lie falsely under oath. So therefore, if they knock them out and they say, you're a thief because you stole on Wednesday last week, we'll accept their testimony and that will disqualify them for sure retroactively for that testimony. So that's not hazama. If it's hazama, you could say it's a chiddush. If it's not, so here the Gemara is going to play it out. If you say it's all because of a chidush, leika, then in this case, Rav is going to agree with Abaye that both these cases, we're going to basically say the witness was disqualified from the beginning. But lahach lishna, that any testimony they said from that day, Sunday, is going to be disqualified retroactively. But lahach lishna de amar mishum seder de lekuchot ika. But if it's all that he agrees with Abaye theoretically, but technically he says, listen, we got a separate problem, which is if we say retroactively from Sunday, any testimony that they did between Sunday and Wednesday is going to be it's going to be an issue. We're now going to have to cancel all that and mess up people's monetary stuff. Well, that's going to be a big problem. We don't want to do that. So we're going to say only from Wednesday, the time they said it, even though, let's say, even though it was a gazlan or whatever it might be. He would say it across the board. Anytime there's a hefse, we're going to basically say it goes from now. So Rabbi Yomi Difti says that Rav Papa paskin like Rava. But Rav Ashi Rav Ashi usually has the last say because he was the one who kind of finished the Gemara. Hilchata kavatei da Abaye. We paskin like Abaye. And Hilchata kavatei da Abaye be al kagam. And these are the 6 cases. Okay, this is homework for today. Memorize what these 6 cases are. There's 6 cases where Rava and Abaye disagree, in which, there's way more than 6 cases where they disagree. Remember, they disagree on almost every page of the Gemara. But in 6 topics, we're going to say we hold like Abaye over Rava. The way to remember who's who is Abaye always had, if you remember, he had a rough life. And Abaye always matches more the Shammai type approach. He's usually, not always, but usually the more strict approach, because he had a rough life and he didn't view things in a harmonious way. Rav always tried to make things work in a harmonious kind of manner, more like a Beit Hillel type of approach. And that's usually the way we paskin in general. We try to go with a more harmonious type approach, even if maybe it's not a strict, approach. And Abaye is like the more Beit Shammai, which we don't really hold like, which is the more strict approach. Okay, again, it's not a clear-cut rule, but it is usually the case. So what are the 6 cases? So I did not take too much time. I'm not going to say all the details, but we'll go through very quickly what these cases are. Yesh Shalom Midat, something we're going to get to, the Yud is for Yesh Shalom Midat, which is in Bava Metzia. When you talk about lost items, all about Yesh that we discussed before. What if you don't know yet if the owner is b'mityaesh or not? But there's an assumption that he probably was going to be mityaesh, but you don't know yet. What if he doesn't know he lost the item yet? Okay, can you assume that that's yesh or not? Ayin is our case, eid zomem l'mafreya or michanu l'haba. Lamed is lechi haomei me'elav. Okay, this is, by the way, where what we do for eruvs. How do we make eruvs nowadays? We use poles that are already in existence. That's a lechi haomei me'elav. Okay, a lechi haomei me'elav. You can easily use a beam going across the entranceway to an alley, or you can use a pole standing up or something standing up. That's a lechi. And if it's already there, can you use it, or do you have to put one up yourself? So Abaye actually says you can, and this is where our laws of eruv come from. We use electric poles and all sorts of things that are already in existence. Kuf is kiddushin shalonim seru lebi'ah. Okay, what does this mean? We've learned this already in kiddushin. It means if a man betroths one of 2 sisters, but doesn't specify which one, this is an example of it. He cannot go ahead and have relations with either one of them because each one is perhaps the sister of the woman he's betrothed to. So that kiddushin does not take effect at all, or maybe it does. That's a machloket. Does it take effect or does it not? If there's no way he could have relations with any of them, because now each one is a possible issue, is a possible arayot. Gimel is giloi dapaget. That was the famous case where the woman was embroidering or weaving, and a person came in to give her the get, and she said, "I'm busy, come back tomorrow." And then the messenger goes back to the husband and says, Gidol Bar Eli, his name was, and he says, "Your wife wouldn't accept the get. She was busy. She'd come back tomorrow." And the guy said, "Oh, Baruch HaTov HaMitiv." Like, great, like Baruch Hashem. So did he mean to cancel the get or not? So if you say Giloi Da'at Get is enough, you don't have to say the words, "I'm canceling the get," but you have to just indicate that you wanted to cancel the get, then it would be canceled. If not, he didn't cancel the get here. He just said, Baruch Hashem, or Baruch HaTov HaMitiv. That doesn't necessarily mean. So that's Giloi Da'at Get. Would we cancel the get or not? Mem is muar ochel nevelot lahakis. You eat, you do things against halacha just for the sake of doing it, but not because you want to save money, because it's cheaper to buy non-kosher food. Okay, it's much cheaper. You could buy a burger for a lot less money than you could buy a kosher hamburger. It's much more expensive, usually kosher meat. But if you do it for the money, so for sure you can't be a witness, because you're clearly trying to save money here and going against halacha to save money. But if you're doing it lahachis, just because you don't feel like doing the halacha, then that's a different story. Okay, then there's a machloket about whether that's going to make you not an aid or not. Okay, this is why people who don't eat kosher, not because not because they're trying to save money, but they just don't eat kosher, right? We actually hold that you can't be a witness even if it's just lahachis, and that's why you have to have, for example, at a wedding, you have to have someone who's shomer mitzvot, keeps mitzvot, who keeps basic laws of mitzvot, because of this halacha, basically, that we hold like Abaye, that you can't be an aid, even if it's not a money thing, okay? It's not just about the money and people who are money hungry, let's say, but other things. Okay, Tanan. Now we're going to bring our Mishna as a difficulty with Abaye. And yes, it's a good question. I see you're writing, Adina. It's always really a question I never figured out a good answer to. Maybe there's people who wrote about it, I don't know, but what's the common denominator between these 6 cases, and why we hold like Abaye in all of them and not in any others, and why this is? It's a really good question. I don't have a good answer, but it could be a good research project. And I got to imagine someone's talked about this, but whether it's a convincing answer or not, I don't know, but you can look into it. Tanan. So now we're going to bring our Mishnah as a difficulty with Abaye. Again, what does Abaye say? Lemafrehu nifsal, from the end. So now we have to do some timelines. Okay, imagine them in your head. I didn't get to chart them out. I didn't get to make a study guide today. There's a possible chance I'll try to put up at least a minimal study guide that deals with some charts that would be helpful for later on in the daf today, but no promises. I'll try. Tanan. Ganav pishnayim v'tavachu machal pihem v'nimtzeu zomemim. So now we have someone who's convicted of being a thief based on 2 witnesses, and tavachu machal pihem. So basically this means the same 2 witnesses testified that he stole, and the same 2 witnesses testified that he slaughtered. So again, testifying that he stole would make you liable for kefel. Testifying that he slaughtered would make you liable for the arba v'chamisha payment, which basically means another 2 or 3, because it's already included. The kefel is included in that. And then nimtzeu zomemim, and then they become eidim zomemim. Mishalmim et hakol. So the eidim zomemim have to pay everything they tried to do, right? The 2 plus the other 3. My laugh. Now, we assume, what does it mean they became zomemim? Well, it would mean someone would have to say, we were with you when you say he stole, and we were with you when you say he slaughtered. So the assumption is, let's just assume, what's the order? Well, they testified first about the theft and then about the slaughtering, so it must be they became zomemim, first about the theft, then about the slaughtering. So my lav she'idu ala gneva v'chazru v'idu ala tficha, isn't that the order? So again, let's say Sunday they said the guy stole. Monday they said the guy slaughtered. Tuesday, eidim zomemim came and said, we were with you on Sunday. No way could you have said that. And on Wednesday, they said, we were with you on Monday when you said that the guy slaughtered. Now, if that's the case, it doesn't make any sense according to Abaye, because if you say that that's the case, it was more like right, that the order was A, B, let's say. So now once they turn them into eidim zomemim on Sunday about the theft, so on Tuesday they say, oh, on Sunday you lied, right? they become eidim zomemim. If they're already disqualified on Sunday, retroactively, then whatever they said on Monday isn't testimony at all, which means that when we convict them on Wednesday of lying on Monday, we can't make them liable to pay the Arba v'chamisha payment because that testimony was ignored in court. Now, of course, retroactively it was ignored, but that's Abaye's whole thing. We're going to undo any testimonies that happened between Sunday and Tuesday. And the tvicha testimony happened after that. So let's read it inside again. Once they got knocked out for the theft that they testified about on Sunday, it turns out retroactively, it turns out they were already disqualified from being witnesses, which means that we can't say your eidim zomemim, you lied under oath, because we undo their testimony entirely. So they shouldn't have to pay for lying under oath because that testimony was basically knocked out retroactively. To which they answer, it must be the reverse order than what you thought. So it's the opposite order. What happened? First, they said on Sunday, he stole. On Monday, they come and they testify and they said he slaughtered. On Tuesday, witnesses come and say, hey, you testified on Monday about the slaughter. Well, you're with us on that day. So immediately they are obligated, the eidim zomemim, to pay the 2 or 3 payment, the extra for the tvicha. On Wednesday, witnesses come and say, Imanu ayitam on Sunday. Now, when they knocked him out on Monday, they didn't retroactively knock out Sunday. But now that they get knocked out on Sunday, now they have to pay for the gneva. And that's how you could get a case where the eidim here who testified about this, the theft and the slaughter, will become eidim zomemim on everything and have to pay all 5 times the payment. But then they say, but still we have a problem. Okay, and then that resolves the question against Abaye. But they say, sof ki hadran mitzimu agneva, igali milta de ki asidu atvicha psulin havu, amay mishalme atvicha. But wait, if they testified about the theft, okay, they became eidim zomemim about the theft. It turns out, so now on Wednesday, they come and say, on Sunday, you were a thief. Well, if we say retroactively they were disqualified from Sunday then, right? On Wednesday, they become retroactively disqualified from Sunday. Then what we said on them about Tuesday, that they were eidim zomemim and the tvicha on Monday, is also wiped out. In other words, no matter what, once we knock out the gneva, it doesn't matter whether it's first or second, we retroactively knock out the testimony about the slaughtering. So it doesn't really make any sense, to which they answer, the only way to understand this Mishna according to Abaye then is to say it's not what we thought it was, that they came on Sunday and then they came on Monday, but hilchata, which actually a weird use of hilchata. Hilchata means the halacha is. Here what they really mean is the Mishna is talking about a case. She'idu bevat echad v'uzmu. It would have to be that they came to court on Sunday and in the same moment they said, we testified that this person stole and that they slaughtered or sold. And then we have once that we basically, when the eidim come and knock them out, right? Let's say 2 on the tvicha, 2 on the gneva, it doesn't, right? And they get disqualified for the whole statement that they made. Well, they retroactively, right, are disqualified from testifying at that moment, but that has since their whole statement was said at one moment, basically we're going to convict them for this and now disqualify them from that moment going forward. But all of it became disqualified to the extent that they're all going to get punished. The first group of witnesses going to be punished both for the gneva and for the tvicha. Okay, and there's no real other way to read that Mishnah according to Abaye. So that's the first part of our daf. Number 1 was to figure out the nafkamina, the practical difference between the 2 understandings of Rava. What cases would they disagree then? Would the 2 understandings of Rava come to a different conclusion? And this question against Abaye from a Mishnah and how we can read our Mishnah to make sense with Abaye. Now we're going to suggest that it's a machloket tannaim. This machloket between Abaye and Rava, retroactive, or from the time they get convicted, that is perhaps, now usually lema ketana is rejected, in this case it will be rejected as well, perhaps it's a machloket tannaim. So let's see. It's going to take a little while to get to how we see it's a machloket tannaim. We're going to have a lot of, what is this talking about? If it's this, it doesn't make any sense. It has to be this. And once it's that, then we can suggest that that's the machloket between them. And then we're going to reject and provide a different way of understanding it. So it's going to be a little bit confusing. Again, very similar. 2 people say you stole. And the same two witnesses said the person slaughtered. V'huzmu al hagneva. We're now going to have not that they were huzam on everything like our Mishnah, but what if they were only convicted of being liars about the theft, or only convicted about being liars about the slaughter? So we're going to have a difference lahalacha. That's the first part. That's tanakama. So huzmu al hagneva. If it was just about the theft, edut shebetela miktata betela kula. Well, once we cancel part of it, we cancel the whole thing. Since they testified about both, and the first part they was canceled, so the rest of it gets canceled as well. This, by the way, fits perfectly with Abaye, that lemafreya. So once lemafreya, well, the second part of whatever they said is going to be knocked out as well, right? So there's no testimony there. So they'll be convicted for the gneva, and the rest of it just is gone. So now comes and what if who's mu'alat tficha? What if the second part of what they said they were knocked out about, the slaughtering? Well, hu mishalem tashlumei kefel, vehem mishalmim tashlumei shlosha. So he's going to pay the kefel, okay? He's going to pay the thief, because they only got knocked out about the selling or the slaughtering. So therefore, the fact that he stole still stands up in court. So the person who is accused of being a thief is going to have to pay the kefel, the double payment. But because they turned these eidim into eidim zomemim about the tficha, about the slaughtering, basically they have to pay what they tried to do. Again, that's the whole punishment for eidim zomemim. They have to pay whatever they tried to do to the other person. They tried to convict the person that they had to pay the 5 payment. Well, they have to pay them the 3 that they tried to do in addition, right? Because the 2 part was already, the person is convicted because they weren't liars about that, or they weren't convicted anyway of being liars. But they were convicted of being liars about adding another 2 or 3. It says 2, 3, but it's really 2 or 3, depending on set or short. I'm a Rabbi Yosi. Here comes the machloket. This is a very ambiguous term. This is if there's 2, what you said, okay, and really they're arguing about the last part. The first part he agrees with, okay, the first part that if you cancel the beginning part, then the rest of it's canceled. But he says the second part where you said who's more on the second, if they canceled out them on the second part, that's only if it's 2 different eduyot. Okay, if the first group was not one group of witnesses, it sounds like anyway, but 2 different. 2 said he was a thief, and 2 said he slaughtered. And then when we cancel the second one, right, the first group still stays. Okay, but be'edut echat, but if it was all the same group speaking, testifying like we thought it was, well then edut shebetela miktata betela kula. I mean, they said he stole and they said he slaughtered. Just because they knocked out the second one, right? We really should knock out the whole thing. Now, this is going to be a little confusing. It doesn't really make sense. So my b'shtei eduyot, if you assume, and my be'edut echat, if you assume like I just explained, ilay b'shtei eduyot means shtei eduyot mamash. 2 witnesses said he stole, 2 witnesses says he slaughtered, and then they knock out the witnesses that said he slaughtered, and then, right, b'shtei kitot, if that's what it means, and be'edut echad is bekat echad b'zar chazeh. And when he says edut shebetela miktata betela kula would be one group, but let's say successive days. Okay, one day they said he stole, and one day he said they slaughtered, and then we're going to say because we knock out the slaughtering, we knock out also the stealing. Well, that doesn't really make much sense. But Amar Rabbi Yosi be'edut echad bekat echad b'zar chazeh, right? Then basically let's fill in. So Rabbi Yosi is basically saying if it was one group of witnesses, but days in successive days, on Sunday they said he stole, on Monday they said he slaughtered, and on Tuesday they came and knocked out the slaughtering part, and then according to Rabbi Yosi, that also knocks out the stealing part. That makes no sense. If they testified first about the theft, and then they testified about the slaughtering, is a question. When they knock out the fact that they said he slaughtered, what does that have to do with the fact that he said on the day before that he stole? How could we possibly knock that out? How on earth would you get to the fact that we're going to undo what they did the day before? That makes absolutely no sense based on anything that we've learned. So it can't be that that's what Rabbi Yosi means. Okay, remember, we're bringing this because we want to suggest that maybe the machloka between him and Kamma is a machloka tannaim. So we don't yet know where this is going and how we're going to get there, but now we're going to have to reinterpret what does Rabbi Yosi say? And then we'll understand what the machloket is about. So again, going back, what does Tanakama say? Tanakama says be'edut echad, which we're going to redefine now. Let's just go through the shitot before we continue. Just to review, if it's one testimony, then what happens? Then, according to the rabbis, the rabbis didn't distinguish one testimony, two testimonies. The rabbis think if they were canceled out on account of the second part of what they said, then we split. We say the first part stands, the second part is canceled. So the first part stands, the thief will have to pay the double payment. The eidim zomemim will have to pay the extra 3 parts. Rabbi Yosi says, no, if it was one group of witnesses who said both that they stole and that they slaughtered, one after the other, right? Let's say successive days, then we're going to basically say once you knock, since it was the same group of people, once you say you were lying about the slaughtering, they must have been lying also about the stealing, which we basically said makes no sense according to halacha, because just because we're knocking out their second testimony has nothing to do with their first that they said yesterday. So therefore, we're going to have to reinterpret it. How are we going to reinterpret it? Well, elalad b'shtei eduyot doesn't really mean 2 different groups of witnesses like we thought, because again, Rabbi Yosi had said we're going to distinguish between 2 groups of witnesses and 1 group of witnesses, in which we thought was 2 groups of people, right? One said stealing, one said tvicha, slaughtering, and that's why we're going to split. And only those are liars, those are not. And on that, I agree with Tanakama. But if it was 1 group of witnesses, then I think it all gets, right? We view it as one thing. But if you say, so now we're going to say no, shtei eduyot can't mean that because it makes no sense. Even if they said we stole, they said, and then they said next day he slaughtered, and they were lying about the slaughter, it doesn't mean they were lying about the theft, so that can't make sense. So what is shtei eduyot? Be'edut echad ke'ein shtei eduyot. It's 1 group of witnesses that's like 2 different testimonies. What would that mean? That's how we understood the second part, which is ma'nihu kat echad b'zeh achar zeh. If it was 1 group that came one after the other, meaning one day they said he stole, one day they said he slaughtered, the next day they turned them into eidim zomemim for the slaughtering, then Rabbi Yosi says, I agree with you, Tanakama. We're going to split. They didn't become eidim zomemim on the theft. And this is how we started today, right? We talked about this before. Ava, be'edut echad bivat echad lo. What is edut echad? Edut echad means 1 group who came, and at the same breath they said, we saw him steal, we saw him slaughter. Then, if we knock you out on the tvicha, comes Rabbi Yosi and says, we're going to knock you out also on the theft, because it was all said in 1 statement. Now, what's the machloket then? Actually, Tanakama makes no sense now, because if we're going to knock out part of what you say at 1 moment, then shouldn't we knock you out for the whole thing? Well, that's going to be the machloket, and we'll see in a minute what this is. V'savua de kule ama toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. Okay, now we're getting into a whole other thing, which is toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. What does this mean? If you make a statement, okay, this is very relevant, by the way, in davening. If you start davening, let's say you're in the 10 days of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, 10 days of repentance, where you're supposed to say HaMelech HaKadosh instead of Hakel HaKadosh. And you finish the bracha, you said Hakel HaKadosh, and then you remember within toch kedei dibur, which means the amount of words, the amount of time it takes to say, well, we're going to see maybe 2 opinions about this in a few minutes, but Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori, that's the classic. You say greetings and peace to my teacher and rabbi. Now, if it's within that time frame, we view it as if you really didn't say what you just said, and you can correct yourself. Okay? So if you say, and in this case, it's different. It's saying the person said, I stole, and I'm sorry, the person said he stole and he slaughtered. And it was all within that time frame, which means we view it as 1 chunk. So now here's the machloket. Is this not the root of the machloket? And with that, we're going to get to Rava and Abaye. Because the rabbis say, when do we cancel his testimony? When he becomes an eid zomem, when we convict him in court. So on Sunday, he said, the witnesses said, so-and-so stole and so-and-so slaughtered. On Monday, 2 witnesses came and said, hey, you were with us at the time of the slaughter. Now, when you say that, so the slaughter we can't accept anymore. But from when do they become disqualified as witnesses? Only on Monday. So the fact that before that they said he stole is actually going to stay. So the stealing part, we succeed in convicting the thief of, just not the slaughtering part. Because at that moment he becomes a zomem. So we're going to knock out the part they lied about. But not on the geneva, and that's because we hold mikanu lahaba only from the moment they get convicted. That's Rava. Rabbi Yosi sover lemafreya hu nifsal. Rabbi Yosi says you're convicted from when? When does your testimony get canceled? From the moment you lied in court. Now, if you say toch dibur damei, then we view, and now this is, by the way, a whole interesting question about toch dibur damei. Either we say it's like you made, we let you correct your mistakes within a short time frame, okay? But some people view it, and this sugya really proves that it could be viewed as, we view increments of time, okay? Even though first it was the gneva, then it was the tvicha. What we basically say is, since they were said within a certain time frame, we view it as if that was all one increment of time, one unit of time. And therefore, if we're going to say from that moment of time, you're disqualified from being a witness, then anything you said then is going to be canceled. And that's why we're going to basically say we're going to convict you of lying about that entire thing, because you are right lemafreya hu nifsal. So Kevin the miyad ki asidu hu the mifsale ki tzamulu atvicha tzamule nami agneva. Right, so you're going to become, and that's the idut shebetela mitzata betela kula. Because you said this all within one time frame, and because we go lemafreya, so now we're going to basically knock out your entire testimony and say you were lying about everything. And that's toch dibur. And then this would prove that the machloket that Abaye and Rava had in the 4th generation of the Amoraim was actually the same machloket many, many generations before between these two tannaim. Okay? That's what the Gemara suggests. But the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense, really, because if you're going to say toch dibur is kedibur damei, you can't say that the Kamma holds we're only going to cancel your tvicha and not your geneva. What do you mean? If we view it as one unit, then if we cancel out your testimony about the tvicha, we would have to cancel out your testimony about the geneva also. That's all viewed as one thing. So we cancel part of it, you would have to cancel the whole thing. It doesn't make any sense. So forget the machloket being about Rav and Abaye and lemafreya and lahaba. No, that's not the machloket here. Everybody agrees that lemafreya hu nifsal, that is from the time they testified. The question is only, do we view toch dibur as kedibur damei or not? So now turning to Amud Bet, Rabbanan savre toch dibur lav kedibur damei. The rabbis hold no. We view this as events on a timeline. Even if you said it within no time, they still testified first about the theft, then about the slaughtering. When they get knocked out about the slaughtering, they get knocked out from that moment, not from the moment of the theft. So the moment of the theft stays. And because we don't view this as one, as if it was said at the same time. For Rabbi Yosi sabar, toch dibur damei. And Rabbi Yosi holds, what are you talking about? Anything you say within a certain time frame, as if it was said at the same exact moment. And therefore, if we knock out part, we're going to knock out whatever they said in that mouthful. So basically, that's the machloket, or that's possibly the machloket, in which case you can't prove, it's not conclusive, that the machloket between Rabbi Yosi and the rabbis here is the same machloket as Abaye and Rava. So again, what we try after bringing, the two nafkaminas between Rava and his two options, after bringing a question against Abaye from our Mishna and answering it, after bringing a suggestion that there's a machloket tannaim here, that their machloket is based on an earlier machloket. I see someone said, but we pass on like Abaye, but the psak of Abaye happens in the 6th generation of Amoraim. That's much later. This is before there's a psak. This is before Abaye and Rava even exist. We want to say perhaps these two rabbis are arguing about the same thing, and we basically say it's not clear that that's the case. But now we have a side problem, which is the conclusion of the Gemara here, or at least to say this is not conclusive, was to say that Rabbi Yosi holds in this machloket the toch dibur is kedibur damei, right? That anything that's said within a very short time frame is going to be viewed as one statement. Rabbi Yosi toch dibur kedibur damei. But does he really hold this? There's a Mishna in Temura which seems to indicate not. What is Temura? Temura is, I have an animal that I designated for a sacrifice, let's say a korban ola, a burnt offering. And then I take another animal and I say, listen, I really don't want to use this animal. I want to switch this new animal and take the old animal back. I can't do that according to Torah law. But if I do it anyway, both become sanctified. Okay, the first one doesn't lose its sanctity. I can't remove sanctity off an animal that was already sanctified for a sacrifice. But the one that I tried to replace it with actually becomes sanctified as well. So now the question is, let's say I have two animals in front of me, not one, but I have two. One I designated as a shlamim and one I designated as an ola. Okay, one's a burnt offering, one's a peace offering. So now what happens? I say the following declaration to the third animal that's standing in front of me that's nothing right now. I say, Harezo tmurat ola, tmurat shlamim. This can't possibly be. I can't make a korban, an animal, both an ola and a shlamim. Okay, forget about the fact that I'm not allowed to do this in the first place. But if I do it, it is effective. I can create sanctity here. But the question is, which sanctity does this animal get? Does it become an ola? Does it become a shlamim? How do we view the fact that I said two totally contradictory things? So Rabbi Meir says, Harezo tmurat ola divrei Rabbi Meir. And this fits with Rabbi Meir that we've seen many times before, particularly in Hadran, we talked about this, that if you say something, and then you say something that seems to contradict it, we go by the first thing you say. We call it tfos lashon rishon. We assume that what you said first is the real thing. So you said ola, it's ola. We ignore your second part of what you said. Rabbi Yosi, and this is what we're looking for, Rabbi Yosi, Omer, because this is why we brought it, to see Rabbi Yosi doesn't hold toch dibur dibur damei. He says, well, it really depends on what you intended. Now, either you meant to say, I want it to be both, but you couldn't say both in the same mouthful. Why not? Because you can't say at the same time, shlamim and ola, right? This is, what does it remind you of? Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, right? The two dibur, one says zachor, one says shamor, and the assumption is that God said them, right? We say in Hadran every week, that God said them both at the exact same moment, something only God could do. We can't possibly have two words come out of our mouths at the same time. But with the person, if the person really meant, I want this to be both, which it really can't be, but we'll see what you do in a minute. Now, why did he say ola first and then shlamim? Because there's no way to possibly express ola and shlamim and have them come out of his mouth at the same time. So we're going to say, right, then dvarav kayamim. If the person really meant to say both, and really put the sanctity of both on this animal, then this animal has the sanctity of both. Now, you can't bring a sacrifice like that, so what do? You wait till the animal is blemished, because you can't bring it as an ola, because it's also part shlamim. You can't bring it as a shlamim, because it's part ola. You wait till it gets blemished, then you can sell the animal, take the money, because once an animal is sanctified for the temple, you can't not do something with it, unless it can't be brought as a sacrifice. So you wait till it's blemished, you can't bring it as a sacrifice, you sell it, and then you split the money. Half the money goes to buy an ola offering, half the money goes to buy a shlamim offering. If you don't have enough money, so you add some more, obviously, but you have to designate, half is designated for each. But that's not the important part for our purposes. The important part for our purposes is, what if the person changed their mind, toch dibur here? So now, but if they said tmurat ola and then changed their mind and said, oh, no, wait, I want to do a tmurat shlamim, which theoretically, if you hold toch dibur damei, we'd allow you to correct yourself, like you could fix your prayers. Well, harezo tmurat ola, we don't allow that. The hevina ba. So first they say, okay, I already kind of ruined it. Sorry that I did that. But right now they don't assume it's toch dibur. They just say, if you said this is tmurat ola and then you change your mind and want to change it, well, you can't change because it's too late. I mean, obviously, once you turn an animal into an ola, you can't just switch it for a shlamim. So hevina ba, they said nimlach pshita. Obviously, if you change your mind, it's obvious that you can't do that. So amarav papa nimlach b'toch dibur kamrinan. Okay, now they answer like I said, which is, the question was here, and what he was pointing out is, even if it's toch dibur, you can't change it. It's too late. Okay, even if you immediately change what you wanted. So now they say, Amre. So we have a contradiction. Here he doesn't allow for toch dibur, at least the way they understand this Mishna, right? And Rabbi Yosi's opinion in this Mishna is, it must be toch dibur, otherwise it's obvious what he says. There would be no point to tell us this. So it must be toch dibur, and he obviously doesn't hold that it's relevant, to which they answer an interesting answer, hard to fathom, but trei toch dibur have. There's two toch diburs. Chad kedei she'elat talmid l'rav, v'chad kedei she'elat harav l'talmid. If a student goes to the rabbi, they say, Toch, they say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori. That's 4 words. If the Rav goes to the student, he says Shalom Alecha. Period. 2 words. So we're talking about a fraction of a few seconds of difference, but that is the big difference. So Kilele the Rabbi Yosi Kadei Shelat Tamid LeRav. If it's already a 4-word difference that was in between Harezo Tmurat Olah, Harezo Tmurat Shlamim, then already there was a difference that was too significant to basically accept and allow you to change your mind. Then he doesn't hold it. But in our case, again, there's a different use of toch dibur. In our case, it's not that you're changing something. In our case, it's that we view it as one package. So if the person goes into court and says, we saw this person steal and we saw this person slaughter, and they said it within the time frame of Shalom Alecha, really right next to each other, then Rabbi Yosi would say, right, Shalom Alecha itle. Then he would hold toch dibur as kedibur. And in that case, Kamma disagrees and says, no, it's not. We view them as 2 separate statements. Okay, so that was just an aside. Could it really be true? The way we tried to explain that source is the machloket is something else. Let's test it from a different source, and they come up with an answer. Convincing or not, I don't know, but it is an answer. Now we get to our last sugya, which is Amar Rava. And this is where I made reference to this in the beginning. Eidim shehu chashu. We have 2 contradictory testimonies. Okay, one says stole on Sunday, and the other says someone else stole that, or we were with the thief on that day. It can't be you saw him stealing there. We were with him somewhere else. And then levasof huzmu. Now, the second group basically caused the first group to get knocked out, and the second group isn't accepted either. Nobody's accepted really. But then eidim zomemim come after and say, hey, we were with that first group on Sunday where they claim they saw this guy stealing somewhere else. Now, do we already view that as if that testimony was knocked out of court because of a Eidura Kasha? Comes Rav and he says no. If they were first contradicted and then they became huzmu, they get killed. Okay, this would be a case not where I said about theft. It would be, let's say they said so-and-so killed someone. Then the eidim zomemim would be killed as well. When witnesses come and contradict your testimony, they don't knock you out of court entirely and make it as if your whole testimony is canceled. No, your testimony is still there potentially, that if somebody comes and knocks it out, or someone comes and knocks out the ones who contradicted you, right? They can, if they come out and say, Imanu eitem, you were with us, then you can become eidim zomemim. And now he's going to say, Amar Rava menamina. This is a bit of a complicated case, kind of like before, where we understood something one way and it didn't make sense, and we had to explain another way. We have another one like that now. Background to this is if a master, we've learned this already, knocks out the eye or the tooth or any kind of limb of his slave, his Canaanite slave, the Canaanite slave goes free and becomes a full-fledged Jew. That's what happens when you free your slave. So if somebody testifies, Ditanya, mi'idani be'ish ploni, shesimet enavdo. So somebody comes and says, this master knocked out the eye, blinded the eye of his slave, vihi pilacheno, and then knocked out his tooth. Now, what's supposed to happen in this case? If it's really true testimony, well, first the slave goes free, and then because he's a Jew and he's free, since the knocking out of the tooth happened after the slave theoretically was supposed to go free, so now the owner has to pay damages for the knocked out tooth. Now you have to remember for this whole sugya, which is kind of obvious, but a knocked out tooth is going to be worth less than a blinded eye. Okay, a blinded eye is more damaging than a knocked out tooth. So now they say, Sha'arei harav omer ken. Well, it's in the better interest of the Rav. This makes no sense. The Rav is the master. Okay, this doesn't make any sense. Why would it be in his best interest that his slave goes free and he has to pay damages? So that doesn't make sense. And then nimtzu'u zomemim. And then if those witnesses become zomemim, what do they have to do? Mishamim damei ayin la'eved. Okay, this makes absolutely no sense. They have to pay the value of the eye to the slave. First of all, they should pay the value of the tooth to the slave, and they should pay the value of the eved to the master, because they basically caused the master a loss by having the eved go free. That's what they were trying to do. Because remember, they get what they tried to do. So the Gemara says this doesn't make any sense. If we go by the simple reading, that there is no other test, there is no other group of witnesses. Okay, you'll see why they're saying that in a minute. But basically, there were 2 witnesses who testified the following, and then there were 2 witnesses who knocked them out. Well, mishamim damei ayin la'eved, batar demafke le'lecheru damei eno kavai shlume. After he makes the slave go free, he shouldn't have to pay, right? He was trying to make the slave go free by saying he knocked out the eye. They shouldn't have to pay the damages for the eye. Ve'od damei kule eved l'rabbai shlume. And They should have had to pay damages of the fact that the master was going to lose his slave, should have paid the value of a slave. The od, Sharei Harav American, this is good for the master. Harav Minichale, this is certainly not good for the master at all. His slave goes free and he has to pay for the tooth. So it must be something else, and that's going to then prove his point. Elalav, kigon da'atu beitre, va'amre, ki pilat sheno v'simei eteno. Two witnesses first come and say, first he knocked out the tooth, then he blinded the eye. That was the first group of witnesses that come. Abaye meitav leharav damei no. Now in this case, the slave goes free, and the master has to pay the higher amount for the eye, not for the tooth. And then a second group comes, and now you're going to see why this is in the best interest of the master. And what did they say? No, it was the opposite order. They said first it was the eye, which made the slave go free. Then it was the tooth, which means that no matter what, he had to free the slave, because everyone agreed that the slave got something knocked out. But the question is, does he have to pay for the eye or the tooth? Now, because he has to pay for the lower amount now, according to the second group, that was in the best interest of the master because he ends up paying less. Right? Only the tooth. Now, what happened? The third group comes, and this is why they said, the first understanding was there were only two groups. Now there's three groups. One said it was this order, one said it was the other order. Eidim, zomemim, and which one did they knock out? The second group, which tried to lessen the amount the slave was going to get. So now they come and they knock, forgot. The first ones and the second ones are contradictory witnesses, right? Because they each say opposite things. So theoretically, at this point, we have contradictory testimony, and we should knock them out of court because they're not, right? They say opposite things. And that, by the way, explains what the Rav Ashi, because it's better for him to only pay for the tooth. And then what does it say? If the second group became knocked out, zomemim mishamim damei la'eved, they would have to pay. Now think about it. What did they say? They said the master only had to pay for a tooth instead of an eye. So what did they really try to do? What's kasher zamam? They tried to get the slave to get less money. And then they have to pay the slave what they were going to make him lose out, which is the money for the eye really did minus the money he would have gotten for the tooth. It's not the whole money for the eye. Say it's $100 for the eye, $50 for the tooth. So they have to pay the $50 difference. Okay. How much they were trying to cause a loss for the slave. So that explained why it's in the best interest of the Rav, because he would only have to pay 50 according to what they said. But when they turned out they were liars, they have to compensate the 50. Why don't they have to pay the value of the eved to the adon, to the master? Because everyone agreed that anyway he goes free. So that wasn't anything they tried to do that they were right, that was lying. Shema mina. Now, what was the whole point of this all? Well, first there was contradictory testimony, and then they became zomemim, and they became liable. So what do you see here? Shema mina, kashat chilal hazamai. The denying it, right, is the beginning of hazamah, meaning when you have a contradictory claim, we don't say, oh, we just erase your testimony entirely. And if zomemim come later, well, your testimony's not there. No, the contradictory testimony is already setting up that perhaps you're lying. If we get more evidence later that you really lied because we have eidim that come sit and say you were with us on that day, then we can make you liable for paying the damages. Okay, so that was the last part. The earlier part I already reviewed. So the last part was just that Rava has the statement, and then he proves his statement that hakashat is, right, that if you first contradict the testimony and then they become zomemim, we actually make them pay or, get killed, whatever kind of testimony it was. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everybody a good week. Maybe a quieter week and a week with bringing peace. Have a good day.